back into the swing of things here. Hey, it is good to be back with you this week. I apologize that I wasn't here. I'm grateful that Brandon stepped in and at least let you know that I wasn't going to be here, although I think I went back and listened to it, and I think he had me sort of, if not in the grave, he had me on the way to the hospital in an ambulance, and that just wasn't true at all. I just, my week got sideways. I lost my voice. Everything got kind of crammed down, and I just was really unable to do this in a good way. So he stepped in, and I hope everybody is well and you were okay with that. But we're back into the swing of things here again, and I'm glad to be here. And I'm just going to pick up where I left off from the last message that I gave. We're in the middle of this study on thinking about how do we live each day with a deep awareness of God, and how does that affect our prayer life? How does it affect our worship of the great unseen God who gives evidence of his existence in every moment of every day? How do we do that? And that's kind of where we're at, but we're in the midst of a study, or at least looking at the Lord's Prayer, this spot in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus sort of stops right in this moment and says to his disciples and to anybody else who is listening, this is how you should pray. Don't do it that way. Do it this way. This is how you should pray. And I'll tell you, we have much to learn about prayer. And I think we have even more to learn about how God works and how he makes himself evident in our day-to-day. And so looking at the Lord's Prayer is really just kind of another step in that process for us. But I want to go back to that passage. It's in Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. And at the end of what I'm going to read is verse 11, and we haven't looked at that yet, at least not in this context. But let me read it for you. It's here down at the bottom of the screen. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then we get to this line. Give us today, or give us this day, our daily bread. Now, we're not going to go backwards and look at some of the things that we've looked at. We're going to move on from here and really look at this line that he says, "This then is how you should pray. Give us today our daily bread." There's an Old Testament story that forms the backdrop of this line, I believe, in this part of the prayer. And the story may be even familiar to you who have spent some time in a church setting, especially if you were children, because this is a reference to one of the most famous Bible stories out of the Old Testament. It's recorded in the book of Exodus, and in the book of Exodus, which is the second book of the Old Testament, the second book of the Bible, it narrates a story of the children of Israel, God's chosen ones, living in slavery in Egypt. Now again, there's a whole story behind how this happened, but in the midst of this story, we have a new, really important character in the biblical narrative who comes on the scene, and that is Moses. And there's some story behind how he was born and how he was rescued and how he was taken into not just the nation or the country of Egypt, but into the family of the Pharaoh, the great leader of Egypt. But in that moment, I believe, when he was born, there was clearly God had ordained the steps of Moses and how he would be the one chosen to lead the Israelites out of slavery, out of their bondage in Egypt, into the promised land that God had given them, that they would arrive there, and that is where they would live out their days. And so this story, this part of the story in the early chapters of Exodus, we read about Moses going kind of face to face with the Pharaoh, the great leader of Egypt, who had put the Israelites in jail, had put them under bondage of slavery and so forth. And we have this great line in the story where Pharaoh looks at, or where Moses looks at the Pharaoh and says, let my people go. Let them go. My God, the great God of Israel, has told me to tell you, let them go. And if you don't, Pharaoh, really bad things are going to happen to you and to your people if you don't listen to the God of Israel. And the Pharaoh, full of his own ego and his own power, doesn't pay any attention at all to Moses. And so God curses the Pharaoh and the Egyptians with 10 horrible plagues that just these crushing plagues that brought Egypt to its knees, culminating with the plague of killing the firstborn sons of the families of Egypt. And that plague resulted in the Israelites leaving in the middle of the night, leaving their bondage, leaving their slavery in the middle of the night, but not before the very angel of death who had been commissioned to go and kill all of the firstborn sons of the people of Egypt. That angel of death miraculously passed over the households of the Israelites, passed over their homes, because those homes had been through the Passover meal, and the blood that was sacrificed through the lamb at the meal was painted on the doorposts and the top of the door of those homes, so the angel of death would pass over those homes, sparing the lives of the firstborn sons of the Israelites. Oh, it's such an amazing story. And you can go back into those first chapters of Exodus and read all about that. But as the story goes, God not only got them up and moving and leaving that night, but he led them. He led them through the hand and voice of Moses all the way out of Egypt. And the mighty Pharaoh and the Egyptians pursued them, trying to catch them and either kill them or bring them back into slavery. And one of those stories that we read about is how the Israelites got up to the sea and the sea parts. It just separates, and they are able to walk through to get to the other side. And as the Egyptians followed, and they were out in the middle of this sea of water, the water collapses on them, crushes them, and gives the Israelites kind of a clean path to get to the promised land. But what we read about, and this is a big part of the story, is that as they passed through that sea into the other side, they began wandering in the desert. They just began wandering on their way to the promised land. No food for a period of time, no water. And the grumbling and the complaining begins against Moses and Aaron, who were the two leaders. And you can hear, because it's written about it in the book of Exodus, the children of Israel whining and crying to Moses, we can't believe you brought us here. It would have been better to die in Egypt. At least we would have had food. And Moses says, trust God. He is going to provide. He is going to provide food. And we look back on this story and it seems kind of dumb. It seems like, God, can't you just trust God? But it was more than just the food. God wanted them to trust him and to obey his words that were given through the lips of Moses. A whole lot like the way we need to live our lives right now. Is to trust and to obey God, even when it doesn't look like there's a clear path forward. Anyway, God says to Moses, tell the children of Israel that I'm going to rain down bread from heaven. What? That makes no sense. Moses, tell them to go out each day. Just go out of their tents, go out of where they're sleeping, get up, and there will be bread laying on the ground. And tell each one of them to gather up enough bread for them and for their family for that day, for one day. And gather no more than that, just enough food for one day. On the sixth day, you can gather enough for 2 days. But every other day, just enough for one day, enough bread. And each day, as the story goes, these little wafers came floating down. I picture it looking a whole lot like snow coming down. When they got up in the morning, these little wafers covered the ground. Just covered the ground. And we don't know exactly how many Israelites there were. Most scholars believe that there were at least 1 million. Certainly hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Israelites out there. Maybe as many as a couple of million. God, it just blows my mind to think about how many there must have been out there. And God rained down enough bread for all of them. Man, that is a lot of bread. The people called the bread manna, and that word in Hebrew, it means, what is it? They went out every morning and go, what is it? And it's bread. And some disobeyed God and took more than enough, more than their share. They stored up enough, they would take and kind of hoard it away. But the way that God made it, He knew they would probably do that. That stuff wouldn't last more than a day. It would begin spoiling at the end of one day. You couldn't save enough of it because it wouldn't be fit to eat. And finally, they learned the hard way. Trust God for that bread. And for more than 40 years, that was how they lived until they reached the promised land. God's promise was this: I will give you enough food for today. And this is the story they would have remembered. Those young Jewish followers of Jesus who were scattered out there on the side of the mountain as Jesus says, "This then is how you should pray. Give us today our daily bread." They would have remembered the story because they told it, because their fathers told it to them, and their grandfathers told it to their fathers. And throughout all of those generations, that story of the parting of the Red Sea and the manna coming down from heaven, they would have known that story. It's a peculiar phrase to say, "Give us today our daily bread." It means give us enough bread for our sustenance and our support and our health and strength. Give us the proper amount of what we need. God, give us food to eat. Keep your promise. Give us what we need and not what we want. That's what that one line in the Sermon on the Mount, in that part about prayer, means. Give us today. Give us enough for today. Clearly a lesson to teach them to trust Him. And as all of those lessons that God teaches, it points to something even bigger. Looking back is easy now, though we don't often pay any better attention than they did as they were wandering in the desert, I'm afraid. It's easy to look back now and read in our Bible those lines that when Jesus said, man will not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Or when He said to His followers, I am the bread of life. You will never go hungry. We can look now back at that and go, yeah, He was teaching them that He was what they really needed. So I guess I want to ask you this question. What does it mean for people like us? When Jesus said, "This then is how you should pray," what does it mean for us, we who have plenty of food? In fact, what does it mean to those of us who have more than enough? Look, I went shopping in the bread aisle last week. God, there are so many choices just of bread. Not to mention all of the other food that is in the aisles of our local Winco. Does this prayer even apply to us today? Well, here's where I've landed. On that line in the prayer where Jesus says, "If you're my followers, this then is how you should pray." I think at a minimum, one of the things we are doing is that we have this tendency to place the emphasis in this prayer on the wrong word. It's really easy to see this line in the Lord's Prayer as being about bread. Give us our daily bread, the bread that we need. Where I think the emphasis needs to be not on bread, but on this day, today. we are people who have learned throughout the course of our lives. We've learned it from our parents. We've learned it from culture. We've learned it from history. We save. We save and we prepare and we plan and we live our lives for the future. I mean, it is something that we pass on to people. Always save. Save. Have enough in the bank. Have enough in your account. Have enough in your cupboard. Have enough in your pantry. Get ready for a rainy day. Be ready for disaster. It's going to be right around the corner. And so we have learned to be hoarders. And honestly, we are hoarders of manna. When now is what matters. When today is what matters. And that's what Jesus, I think, is teaching in this. What would it mean for us to live completely and totally aware of God's, not just of His presence, but of His provision? To live completely aware of God's presence and provision, one day at a time. One day. To realize that everything is from or by His hand. And it's all His. And He is in total control of everything we have at any given moment. Well, I'll tell you, we could certainly live on less. We could live on way less if we really believed that He would provide. And not only that, there would be more than enough for everyone. But honestly, that's not what we value, and it's certainly not what we are taught. Why don't we give more money in the offering box on Sundays? Well, I can tell you why we don't give more of our money to the kingdom, give more of our money in worship, give more of our money to those in need, give more of our money to the ministry even of North Point. The reason that we don't give more is that we're afraid that there won't be enough for us after we have given. I know how this works because I battle that thinking in my own head all of the time. Why are we reluctant to give more time to help other people, more time to serve, more time to give for the good of other people? Well, we're afraid that we'll run out of energy or we'll run out of time to do what we need to do for us. That's just how we are wired. Why are we so afraid to share more of what we have? Because we're afraid it'll get broken. We're afraid somebody will misuse what we loan to them. And oh my goodness, ultimately we're afraid we won't have it anymore for us to be able to use. And yet this prayer is saying, God will provide for today. So live like it. Oh, this is such an uncomfortable prayer. Read it again. Look at it again. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, meaning holy is your name, set apart is your name. How amazing is your name because of what it means. God, you are our provider. Hallowed is your name. Your kingdom come in my life. Your kingdom come, God, in my life. May your kingdom be the most important thing of all. Your will be done in my life, meaning not what I want for me, but what you want for me. Jesus says this then is how you should pray. God, your will be done in my life, on earth as it is in heaven. On earth, now, on earth, here, on earth, today, like it is in heaven. So maybe this prayer looks a whole lot like this. God, give me enough for today. Give me enough bread. Give me enough money. Give me enough grace. Give me enough energy. Give me enough patience. Give me enough love. Give me enough mercy for today. Because God, I'm going to spend it all. I'm going to give it all today for you and for your kingdom and for your will to be done. And I know you will give it to me all over again tomorrow. Everything that I need, all over again. Wow. What do you think our lives would be like if we began to pray like that? Something to think about. So as we come now, and I apologize, I went a little long today. Hope you stayed with me. But as we come today to our time together to share in the Lord's Supper, gosh, let's take part in this most amazing remembrance of God's ultimate provision through the death of his Son on the cross. His ultimate provision. And we remember it through the bread and the juice of his life given for us. Now that is provision. Till next time, see ya.